Hello and welcome to the Rook's Nest. Alex here, and in today's tutorial we'll be looking at creating an animation like the one I made here. We'll start by setting up this basic simulation, then we'll take a look at creating the texture in Redshift. There's a couple of methods we can use for camera projecting. One that's very quick and will work well in stills or with static geometry, and another slightly more complicated way used for this final animation with its animated geometry. So without any further ado, let's get started. So here we are inside Cinema. This is the scene we're going to be working with. I've already got a few bits and bobs set up. I've imported this can, which I think I got off GrabCAD and then modified it slightly because it had too many polygons, and for the simulation it was a bit much. I've also gone and set up this rig of primitive cubes, which is going to act as our collision objects. So if you take, it's pretty straightforward. I've just used the same cube, stretched it, rotated it, and built this sort of containing bounding box area. And then with a plane at the bottom, which is animated to slide away. So our cans are going to fall in here, fill up this bottom of this box, and then this tray from underneath is going to slide out and release the cans again. So the first thing we're going to do, let's get rid of this, is we're going to just put this in a MoGraph object and duplicate it a bunch of times. So if we come up here, hold down, click cloner, and let's drop our can in the cloner. Let's set our cloner to grid array. Let's put our count to maybe, I don't know, we want it 3 wide and maybe about 24 high or 25, and only 2 depth. Actually, that's a bit too much, too many cans. Let's go 16. And they're too far apart at the moment, so let's just put in a value that makes sense. Let's make them, I don't know, start at 14 centimeters apart, and then 24, and then in the Z, let's just make them 11. So we've got these cans all bunched up. Let's move this cloner up here, out of the shot, like so, because we're going to be looking through this camera that I've got set up, and they're going to fall down here, fill up. This tray's going to slide out, and then they're going to drop. So let's pull this up slightly higher. Drag this up here, out of the frame. And let's just add a bit of randomness to these, because at the moment they're all uniform, so they might fall a bit predictably. So let's grab our cloner, make sure we've got our cloner selected. We go to MoGraph, Effectors, and let's just add a random effector. And in the parameters of our random, because we had the cloner selected, our random has been automatically added to the effectors list in this cloner. If it's not there, you can just drag it in. Just select the cloner effectors and just drag it in here. Now random effector on our parameters tab, we only want, let's just make this quite small. We just want a small variation in the X values and the Z values, and maybe slightly larger on the Y, just to give it a bit more. Ideally we want as little of this intersecting as possible, because when we turn the physics on, or the rigid body calculations, they're going to ping apart because they're intersecting each other. But we're going to rotate these as well, so let's just rotate them and see what happens. Let's make it a full 360 along the Y, and let's give it a, I don't know, like 190, something like that. Make sure things aren't, see, look, these ones are going to ping apart. Just do another 190 on here, or let's just type in 190. Let's have a look. So we've got, oh, we look pretty good for intersecting at the moment, so that looks okay. Now what we're going to want to do is we want to add a simulation tag to this cloner object. So let's first actually turn this into render instance. It will just speed up the viewport a bit. Let's grab this and add a, so right click and go to simulation tags, and we want a rigid body. we're going to just leave all the settings at default for now. If we press play, oh, nothing happens. Well, they fall, so you know that's working. But they're not colliding with our scene setup here. So what we're going to do is, in our collision set null here, which has all of these objects that we want to affect our cans, we just go right click on collision set, simulation tags, and collider body. We just leave all this at default for a second. It's a static mesh, but I'm going to change it to, instead of static mesh, I'm just going to change it to automatic because they're all cubes, and also it's not static because this tray at the bottom is going to slide out. If that's static, it won't register the moving of the mesh. If you press play now, ta-da! Goes up nicely. And that looks like a pretty smooth animation straight out of the gate. But I think it's because I've got a few settings set up here that have carried over from when I did it before. So I'll just go through the things that you will most likely need to change. Let's just select our cloner object here. Now, they're a bit too frictiony, these cans. Let's just reduce that to 50%. I want them to slide around a bit more because they're... There you go, that's better. See, dropping around. Maybe give them a bit of bounce, maybe 25%, just to make them a bit more pingy. There we go. These are all subtle changes, these bits. These don't really matter. One thing that does matter with our can is if we zoom in, I mean, this looks pretty good at the moment, but we've got like a small bit of intersecting there, which you don't really notice. I mean, you could get away with this, but I'm going to change the collision shape of this dynamics body from automatic to convex hull. Now what that's going to do is it's going to be slightly slower than the automatic mode, but it'll be slightly more accurate. There we go. But what's happening is, so instead of it being, I'm not actually sure what the automatic, it's just automatically choosing something, but with this, it sort of draws a bounding polygons that it uses as a collision mesh. So it's sort of like won't go inside because it's not concave, so it won't go collide in the surface here. It'll just be flat across here like a collision edge. But it's good enough to get away with it here. Like see here, it's colliding there, not on the actual can inside, because it's convex, not concave. But yeah, if you've got a lower poly mesh, or something a bit more simple like a cube, these are quite high poly, you can do moving mesh. Your calculations will be a lot slower, but it will give you more accurate results. I won't turn that on for this because it will crash my computer. So there we go, that's that for that. Let's go to our, let me check these. Yeah, these are all fine for now. Let's go to our collision set mesh. Now, at the moment they've got 100, this is 100% friction and 100% bounce. Now I don't want that. Let's just make this 50 and 50. And we press play. There we go. But it's a bit annoying the way they're stacking up like this. So I might go to my cloner object quickly, my random, sorry, and just modify the seed and see if I get any different results. There we go. See, got a nicer fall there. Still got this stack on the side. That's not too bad. Let's try one more time. Have a few more ticks. Oh, look, we're getting the bottoms there. A few more, one more, maybe two. Let's see what happens. There we go. That's nice. Okay, so I'm happy with that as is. Now we should modify our scene settings or our project dynamic settings. Now, if you can press Control D to bring it up, or we can go to Edit Project Settings. Either way, make sure we're on the Dynamics tab. First thing we're going to do is, at the moment, if we look, to me, these are all falling way too fast. I want it a bit slower. I want to be able to see what's going on. So I'm just going to drop the time scale to 50%. And now you see much more of the animation. Oh, that can did a nice little flip. Very cool. And we're also going to come to this expert tab. Now by default, if I set these to defaults, that's at 100, that's at 5, that's at 10. If I play this now with the default settings, you'll see, how it's a bit less, you see you've got a bit of shaky bits, a bit of jittery stuff going on. First thing you can do is increase this. So how many solve iterations per step and how many steps per frame. So I just put these up to 15, 20. I mean, you can go quite high with these, but sometimes there's a good middle ground. It's not always a good idea to go huge. Like, that seems quite smooth. But if I was to put this up to 50 and 50, you might see that it starts to it'll slow down. But it feels more erratic. You see how they're all jiggling around? So it's not always good to go really high. If I just put this back to 15 and 20. Now the other thing I can do to smooth this animation out, or this simulation, is to adjust this scale, the scale of my scene. Now because my objects are quite small, they're about 10 centimeters in size, by adjusting this scale, I'm going to improve the accuracy of my solve for these smaller objects. And there we go. See how they sit still now, they're not jittering around. So yeah, that's the dynamic settings. And once you're happy with that, so we've got all this set up, you check, we're at 15 steps per frame, 20 maximum solve iterations per step, and our scale's at 10. We're all good to go. So let's go to our cloner object now. Let's now cache this animation out so we can scrub through the timeline without having to calculate it every time. So we come to the cache tag and just click bake object and just wait for that to finish. And we've got our baked simulation. So now if we scrub through this, we can see it in real time. Let's play. Oh, I like that spinny can at the top. We come to our camera, we'll see what it looks like. Oh, I don't know why it's suddenly got all slow there. Anyway, so now we've got this simulation done. Let's take a look at texturing it now and how we're going to project that text onto the can. Now, like I mentioned in the beginning, there's two ways of doing this, and I'll go through both of them. One for if you just want to do stills, and the other if you wanted to animate and see how it was stuck to the cans and moved with them as if they were accidentally falling into the perfect place. So let's start projecting our texture, or creating our material that we're going to use. So let's select a good frame. 100 when it comes to rest, so like 100 seems about right. Let's hide all the geometry our cans are colliding with, like the boxes and stuff. So if we hold down Alt, double click that to hide it from our viewport and our renderer. Now we can see our cans. Well, the texture I'm going to be using projecting onto this is this one I made earlier in Photoshop. It's just some text, some white, black on white. Actually, it's really dark blue on white by accident, but ignore that. I've just made it at the aspect ratio of my final output render, just to keep things simple. So let's create ourselves a material. So come here to materials, Redshift, materials, material. Let's apply that to our can. Let's just make this UVW mapping for now. And let's open up our Redshift shader graph. What we're going to do is we're going to grab a camera map node, and in here we're going to load in our texture, and we're going to put it straight in to our diffuse. Voila. Now, another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to offset this projection. So I'm going to make a duplication of this of my camera I'm using for my scene. Let's take the protection tag off it. Let's call this projection cam. And let's go back to our shader graph. Let's select that and come down here to camera on our camera map node. So now it's using that as the projection camera. Go back to our viewport. I'm just going to lock this in place, make sure it's locked. Come out, and I'm going to take this projection cam and I'm just going to offset it slightly and rotate it so it's not projecting from the exact point of view of my other camera. So you can see it's got this slight bird. That's maybe a bit too much. So let's give it a... But you can see it's not perfectly flat and round like it was before. So before it was looking like it was photoshopped flat on top, whereas now at least it looks more 3D. So we just slightly offset that camera. Let's come back to our camera view. Now as it stands, this is great if we want to use this as a still, because now I can just, I don't know, I can come in here and I could just, you know, reposition a camera and just take photos because I don't need to be animated. So that's ready to go. But I want it animated and I want this to stick to these parts of the can. So, right, in order to do that, we need to bake down these cans into their individual meshes and then bake UVs onto those. And in order to bake those UVs, we're going to be using our camera mapping tag and we're going to change it to camera mapping on here. And in our texture here, we're not going to be using this. We're just going to be using a normal texture and load in our Rook's Nest label again. Put this in our diffuse. And as you can see, it's not actually working, this camera mapping tag here. That's because it doesn't seem to work with render instances, this tag. It will work if I change this to instance. It updates. Oh, and let's select camera. So projection cam. There you go. And change this to 16:9 because that's my aspect ratio. So it does work like that. And also we can see it in the viewport now, which is kind of helpful. So our next step now that we've got a cloner, we've set these to instance, and we've got our cans, we need to make a bunch of these cans. We need to turn these cans into individual. So let's go to the first frame. It does mean what we're gonna have to do is re-simulate the thing again. So it might not simulate the same way. So you may have to tweak this a couple of times and go over it again, but for our purposes now, we're just gonna rush through it quickly. So what we want to do is create a copy of this cloner. So let's control drag it out of the hierarchy there up. Let's disable this one so it's not affecting our scene. Let's select this and let's just hit C. And voila. Got a bunch of cans. Now we're going to need to make this cache, just make sure this cache is empty because now we have to re-simulate the scene. Go back to frame 0. Let's just cache it straight away. Bake object. So now if we scrub through this, go back to our camera view. Look, there we have our cans, but as you notice, this is all messed up. All our settings are correct, but it's looking messed up in here. Just refresh it just to make sure. There you go. But still, if we move this, it does move with it. But if I refresh this, you see it's back to how it was before. It's not actually staying with the cans. It's still just projecting onto them as they move. So what we need to do is we need to bake this into the UVs. So let's come to frame 100 where we want it to rest. Just refresh this. You can see that's our final resting point. As you can see, the simulation is slightly different as well now. So you might want to tweak it, fiddle it, find one that works for you. And what we're going to do now is we're going to bake these UVs into these cans. So we select all these with this perspective, right click, generate UVW coordinates. So now it's using the UV coordinates. If you check one of these, it's not using camera mapping. And now when we scrub through, you can see cans come together and bring the texture with them. So if we unpause this, we can look at it in the viewport here. Press play. Builds it up. Lets it go. Voila. So now let me just walk you through my materials, or let's just build material that looks similar to the one I did for the final animation. So we come to our materials here. Let's delete our camera map, or let's update this window. Go to viewport. Let's select frame 100. There we go. Back to shader graph view. Now let's grab ourselves a material blender. We're going to have a couple of materials that we're mixing together. Let's make this material our base material. And let's grab another material. Just select copper, my favorite, and plug that into layer 1 color. Now let's remove this from the color channel of this material. And let's apply it to the layer 1 blend color. And let's run this out into our surface. Oh, we got them the wrong way around. Which actually looks quite nice. So let's switch these. Let's do the old switcheroo. Let's make this our base and this our layer 1. There we go. Now our base color, which is this, this will make it darker. Do a nice shade. Let's increase the roughness somewhat. Around there, maybe make them a bit darker. And for my gold material, or my bronze, I'm just going to give it some diffuse white color to bring out the thing. So I'm just going to make this like into a orangey yellow color. We'll drop that up. You can see, you start to see it a bit more, and let's increase the weight. Just put it all the way up. Maybe a bit more red, darker. There you go. Now let's take this and let's use a bump map. So let's create a bump map. So a bump. Let's apply it to both materials in the bump channel. So our copper and our matte. And let's run that straight into, actually let's put it through a ramp node. Put the texture into the ramp, input, texture, input. There we go. Now you see the separation, the bumping between the two. It's a bit high, so we reduce the intensity by going 0.2, make it a bit more subtle. So now you're getting this sort of embossed look. This base material is still too rough, but what I did, I used a max on noise, and I changed the noise type to say something like, I don't know, let's go with wavy turbulence. Actually, no. Let's use something like Poxo. If we have a look at that on the surface, you can see it's like this material. I'm just going to run that straight into a ramp node. Stick it into our material. Which one is it? This one is our rough material. So we're going to put it into the roughness channel. Reflection roughness. Let's have a look at the output of that. And now we're getting these rough areas and glossy areas, but we just want to reduce the effect of that a bit. We want it to be a bit more rough all the time. Don't want it to be ever get that shiny. So let's pop this up here and let's bring this down. Just so we get some variation in the roughness on the surface, and it's still too rough. Too smooth, I mean. So let's do that. Let's make it a bit more rough up there. There, and also I could use the same sort of Poxo noise here to create, if I affect the scale, super small, increase the low clip, high clip, to make these little bumps. And obviously the smaller this goes, gonna make these small imperfections, and I can add that using some layer color shader, layer 1. Let's take the bump map from our ramp here. Let's have a look at what we're getting out in the output. At the moment we're just seeing these dots, but if we disable, so we've got the rook's nest there. We just want to blend mode. Let's make this subtract or darken. So we get some bump in here, and we can adjust the color like that. So we're getting some roughness or bumpiness on the cans from this, and you can just layer up multiple versions of this at different scales. So I can add another one on top of that into layer 1, layer 2 color. Maybe make this one a bit bigger, so 0.006. Enable that, make that darken, and reduce it. So we've got some larger dots. You see, so we get these pitted, and then we can run that bump. So that bump will run across all of them. So if we put this back out, we've got these bumpy materials. This bump is still quite strong in it as well, so we'll just reduce it down. And let's create another material, and let's apply it to our back plate. And this is just going to be the most basic of all of them. I'm going to make it like a dark grey. There we go. And no reflection, but lots of roughness. I just realized I failed to connect this color shader actually into the bump map. So it wasn't actually affecting it, but now you can see it's a bit more rough. Yeah. And if we go looking at my lighting setup for this, we've just got this dome light and a physical sun. The dome light in it just has a HDRI that I created. And if you're interested in learning how to do that yourself, I made a tutorial about it a few weeks ago. So I'll put a link to that in the description. So if you're interested, you can check that out. But yeah, there we have it. So well done for making it this far. If you liked the video and would like to see more, please subscribe, check out the channel, leave a thumbs up. And if you've got any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment. I will be getting back to all of them. And if you'd like to get hold of the project files for this animation, head over to our Patreon. The link is in the description. And that's all from me for now. So thanks for watching. Bye.